Good morning, folks, and welcome to On the Horizon, a webinar presented by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. This meeting is being recorded. We are going to post this recording to our webinars page, and you will get an email when that is available for on-demand viewing. To reduce background noise, all participants have joined in listen-only mode. Please do mute your line if you're not muted. This will help with background noise. We welcome questions and ask that you type those using the chat function. If you lose your Zoom connection, you can try to close your Zoom and reconnect with the meeting link, or reboot your computer and reconnect with the meeting link after that. Today, we're going to welcome Dana Connors, the Maine State Chamber President, to get the program started. Dana.
Thank you, Angie, and it is a pleasure for me to welcome all of you and to thank you for joining us on this year's edition of On the Horizon. As you probably remember from last year's program, this gives us an opportunity to share with you our view on what the issues are in play at this year's session, the short session of the 130th Legislature. We're going to do that in just a moment, but first I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. They are on the screen for your viewing, but I'd like to share with you who they are and to thank each of them. Hammond Lumber Company is our presenting sponsor, our principal sponsor. Our supporting sponsors are AARP of Maine, AmeriHealth, Caritas, Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, Enbridge, MEMIC, Northern Light Health, and Delta Dental. If we were in person, I'd ask you to share with us, with your applause, appreciation for all of them. But let's take a moment before we turn it over to our advocacy team to hear or to see a video from our principal sponsor, Hammond Lumber Company. Angie.
Hammond Lumber Company is a fourth-generation family-owned and operated business. Founded in 1953, Hammond Lumber has steadily grown into Maine's largest independent lumber and building material supplier. We want to thank you for supporting our Maine family business this past year and every year. We feel privileged to have again served the needs of our Maine communities across our 21 locations statewide. The Hammond team is made up of 800 dedicated employees. When you're ready to tackle your next building project, no matter how big or small, depend on Hammond Lumber Company for the products and services you need. Whether you're a contractor, homeowner, or do-it-yourselfer, Hammond Lumber will see your project through from start to finish. The knowledgeable staff at Hammond Lumber will be with you every step of the way and keep your project on schedule. From free estimating and planning, to design and drafting services, and a wide variety of building and remodeling products, including complete home and garage packages, Hammond Lumber, the 2020 Pro Sales Dealer of the Year, is proud to be your building project partner. From our Maine business to yours, we wish you success and good health as we move through the new year in 2021. Learn more at hammondlumber.com or stop by the Hammond location nearest you. Thank you from everyone at Hammond Lumber Company, proud to be one of the best places to work in Maine.
Thank you, Hammond Lumber Company, and thank all of our sponsors for allowing us to bring to you this program. Before we begin, I want to take just a moment by way of saying, while we describe it as a short session, and that it is in terms of duration, it's certainly not short on issues. It may be less bills, 350 bills, instead of approximately 1,700, but they're all important. They're very impactful. And true, we don't have the two-year budget to consider, but every second session, it seems that we have a supplemental budget, usually to modify in the form of cutting some programs because we have less revenue. This year is quite the opposite. There is a surplus of $822 million because revenues have exceeded expectations. And we're going to find out what the governor's proposal is within the next couple of weeks, we anticipate. I'd also mention, although it will not see activity in this session, it is nevertheless an important issue that we learned about yesterday, that one of the three citizens' initiatives did not secure the necessary signatures to appear on this November ballot. That doesn't mean they won't be collecting signatures for 2023, but it won't be this year, 2022. And although it's not been confirmed, I think that we do expect the same outcome for the citizens' initiative that prohibits federal-owned companies from participating financially in referendums and also universal health care. But let's take a look at this year's bills as we see it that we're concerned with or we want to bring to your attention. Like I said, there are 350 bills approximately. That does not include the governor's bills, but we do not anticipate a large number from the governor. We are waiting, as I said a moment ago, for the supplemental budget as to how that $822 million will be distributed and what the recommendations will be for the legislature to consider. But of those 350, there are 200 that we classify as carryover. They did not, their fate was not decided in the first session, so we deal with them in this session. We also have about 150 new bills that have been allowed by the Legislative Council. And in those bills, you're going to hear our advocacy team mention what they mean, their impact. You're also going to hear of the possible concept bills for which there's a title but no detail. It always raises a concern because it's hard to fight what you don't know, but that will have to be decided shortly. I think we learned yesterday there's like 89 or so bills that have yet to be specifically reviewed and assigned. And we're also going to, where possible, be able to take note of those study commissions that have been in place that were enabled in the last session. We expect a report in this session and what the recommendations will be. So there's a lot to consider in this so-called short session, and we're anxious to share it with you. And I would also just conclude with this note, that because of legislative full body, it won't be back to the 26th. Committees are at work, and every week there tends to be more activity. There have been some already, and some of the committees reported out bills that were quite pleased. Others, not so much, and you're going to hear about that as well. So kicking it off will be Peter Gore, our Vice President, who oversees the advocacy team and follows HR. That'll be followed by Linda Caprera, and she follows taxation, appropriations, and related issues. And Ben Lucas will deal with the environmental, natural resource committees information, as well as education, as well as energy and utilities. So with that, Peter, why don't you begin with the carryovers?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're glad you could join us here this morning. We're going to talk about the carryovers that are in both the Labor and Housing Committees and the Health Coverage, Insurance, and Financial Services Committee. We're going to start with the work that the Labor Committee did yesterday on two of those bills. They took them both up in a work session, and contrary to sort of what we had been told would happen, which isn't surprising in this legislative session, they did something exactly the opposite. LD 225 is the first bill. That's a bill that would require employers to cash out an employee's vacation time upon cessation of employment. This bill is regardless of whether an employer currently has a policy to do that or not. As many of you are aware, if in Maine, if you have as an employer a policy that says we're going to cash you out your unused vacation policy when you leave, then that vacation pay takes the same status as wages earned, and you're required to cash it out. If you don't have such a policy, or you have a lose it or use it policy, or you have a PTO policy, then you are not required to cash out the leave. And those things don't change in the proposed amendment approved by the Democrats and the appropriation on the Labor Committee. You need to know that the committee did divide on this issue along party lines. The bill was approved 8-5 by the Democrat majority on the committee. The bill does require employers to cash people out It doesn't appear to impact an employer's ability to cap vacation time, to adopt a use it or lose it policy, or to move to a PTO policy. It doesn't require you to cash out sick time, and it does not appear to require an employer to cash out any earned paid leave, the new earned paid leave law that went in place in January of last year. So those things don't appear to be impacted, but it will require someone who currently doesn't cash out vacation time to do so. And there are also no guardrails on the proposal. So in other words, if you discharge somebody because they are stealing from you, or they may have been assaulted in the workplace, just didn't show up for work, any of those things, and they have vacation time on the books, you will be required, at least under the current language, to cash them out. The second bill, and it's more troubling, is LD 607. Again, a carryover bill from last session. This bill requires an employer, changes the overtime threshold, the salary threshold associated with that demarcation line in part of the three-pronged test of who is a salaried employee versus who is an hourly employee. And I'm going to screen share for a minute with you because I think it's important you take a look at the language that they adopted yesterday. So the dates are going to be changed, but as many of you are aware, in Maine, the salary threshold is tied to the minimum wage. It is adjusted by a multiplier, so it's 3,000 times the state's minimum wage. And as a consequence, our salary threshold in Maine is above the federal threshold, and it has been for a while now. And with the 60-cent increase in the minimum wage effective the first of this year, the salary threshold rose to $38,250. The federal threshold is roughly $35,000 and change. And Maine's salary threshold will continue to go up because the minimum wage is indexed from this point forward every year. This bill tinkers with that multiplier to adjust the threshold. So instead of being a changes starting place in 2022, they've pushed this out to a year. So the first adjustment would be in 2023, followed by 24 and 25. Again, 3,500 times the minimum wage, 4,000 times the minimum wage, 4,500 times the minimum wage. So this translates in dollars and cents in just a $12.75 minimum wage to almost $45,000 in 2023, almost $51,000, almost $52,000 in 2024, and more than $57,000 in 2025. And again, that's all things being equal right now. The minimum wage will increase, assuming a 5 or 6% inflation adjustment as there was this year. You're talking a $66,000 salary threshold by the time you get to 2025. This is by far the highest in the nation. It will be very disruptive to Maine's workplace, and it will be very costly for many employers, and many small businesses just won't be able to stomach that kind of an increase. That has repercussions for how an employer will manage their workplace and their employees. But again, this bill was a partisan vote, 8-5 in the committee, Democrats approving it, Republicans opposed to it. And it's probably the most important bill that at this point that I'm dealing with this legislative session. Whether the amendment is adjusted or whether they change their mind, it's not clear yet. They are going to have to come back and do language review for this bill and 225. Obviously, we'll be keeping you apprised of what happens with those bills. The other other carryovers that I'm watching include LD 965 and that concerning non-disclosure agreements and employment. This bill would prohibit the use of non-disclosure agreements when settling harassment or discrimination claims. I know that there's been a lot of back and forth about this nationally as well, but the issue is under this bill, you couldn't use an NDA unless an employee, the victim of discrimination or harassment, agreed to it. But even so, the victim would still be able to go and give information to government entities like the Department of Labor or the Maine Human Rights Commission, rendering the NDA virtually meaningless. And thus, employers wouldn't be interested in using them. NDAs serve both the employee and the employer and the victim of this kind of egregious action in certain cases. The governor's office has not been supportive of 965. Where it goes from here, I don't know. It has not been taken up yet by the committee. Furthermore, 616, an act to increase accountability for wage violations, would increase wage and hour penalties significantly. This is a bill that we also opposed. Our issue being, it doesn't make a mistake between an accidental or a mistake versus a willful violation. They, again, not scheduled for discussion yet in the committee. And then LD 1338, an act to prohibit employers from retaliating against the use of earned paid leave. This bill, as amended, would, at least in concept, we haven't seen the language. We heard it last session before the bill was carried over, that it would allow an aggrieved employee to take an employer to, in other words, have a private right of action against an employer for what they felt was violations of their right to take the new earned paid leave law. And again, that's an open door to litigation in the courts. We've opposed this. The governor's office does not like this bill. She does also not like private rights of action, expanded private rights of action. The committee hasn't taken it up yet either. And then in the HCIFS committee, 1463 is an act to make healthcare coverage more affordable. It reinstates the HIT tax, the health insurance tax, the state level. That would cause approximately 25% increase in taxes to healthcare, which translates into a $40 million tax increase. The purpose of raising the additional money is to fill what's known as the family glitch in health insurance policies. This is a result of the ACA. The committee decided to carry the bill over to see if the Biden administration would address this issue at the federal level. At this point, they have opted not to do so. What happens with this bill is unclear. So those are my carryover bills. And so, Linda, I'm going to turn to you for your input.
We have a lot of taxation carryovers as well. So I'm going to go over the main ones today. One is the LD 428, that's an act to prevent tax haven abuse. This is the Perennial tax haven bill. Basically, it would require Maine companies to include in their main income from jurisdictions around the globe. We asked the sponsor, Denise Tepler, to carry this bill over because the Biden administration is proposing some sweeping changes at the federal level in the taxation of foreign income. So we didn't want Maine to go beyond that. So she agreed to carry it over. As you know, the administration and nothing's really happened at the federal level with respect to legislation right now. So we're going to be waiting. I don't know what the committee is going to do with this bill, but I'm going to encourage them not to go further and really kind of take a wait and see approach of what the Biden administration is proposing. So that is the tax haven bill. The other bill is an act to improve, it's LD 798, an act to improve the education opportunity tax credit. There was a number of these bills last session that dealt with the opportunity tax credit that's on the books. They proposed a working group that met 3 or 4 times over the summer, and they came up with a proposal that basically simplifies the current credit. And the bottom line of this proposal, it kind of completely revamps the credit. It's going to be a straight line credit with a $2,500 refundable tax credit. So if you don't have tax liability, you can still get the credit. It's going to be for everyone that graduates over after 2007. So it's not going to be limited to STEM students, which the current credit is. That's got an $80 million fiscal note. It does take out employers, so the employers will not get a tax credit going forward if this passes. Our taxation committee met last Friday, and they were inclined to support the bill as it is. It does give the credit to the students, so they were going to be supportive of this. That's the Education Opportunity Tax Credit. LD 1704 is another estate tax bill. This is Rachel Talbot Ross's, I believe. This bill would lower the current exclusion amount from 5.7 to $1 million. So it's even worse than last year's bill, which we killed. I'm expecting that this is going to meet the same fate. It's going to make more of Mainers' estates taxable. So we oppose that bill, and we're going to continue to oppose it. LD 1569, this is the perennial water tax bill. This would impose a 5 cent per gallon excise tax on per gallon on commercial water extracted for commercial bottling use. They were supposed to study this over the summer. They did not meet on this, to my knowledge. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do this coming year with it. But that is a carryover as well. LD 1289, this is another income tax bill. This is Joe Perry's out of Bangor. What this would do is increase the individual income tax rate from 7.15 to 7.95. There were about 9 or 10 of these last session that we killed. I can't imagine that they're going to increase taxes, particularly in light of they have the fact that they have this huge surplus at the state level of over $822 million. If anything, they're talking about returning that. So I don't see that bill going anywhere, but we're going to have to keep our eye on it as well. There's another bill, LD 966. It's a resolve establishing the commission to study fair, equitable, and competitive tax policy for Maine's working families and small businesses. Now, we opposed this last year because it really is the purpose of this is to study the tax impacts on the state's tax policy on working families and small businesses. Well, hello, they left out medium and large businesses. So they really didn't include everybody. So this is a commission that we are opposing. We're going to continue to oppose it. It's really not fair. So those are some of the tax bills that we're going to be watching. There's a few more that we're going to be monitoring as well to see where they go, but those are some of the major ones of the carryover legislation. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Linda, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. I'll start with highlighting 4 carryover bills in the ENR committee. The first one is LD 676, which is Senator Claxton's bill to reclassify a part of the Androscoggin River from Class C to Class B. In Senator Claxton's bill, it would have reclassified the river starting at the Great Island or the Gulf Island Dam, which is about in Turner, and would go down through Lewiston, eventually into Mary Meeting Bay. There is a little bit of an update on this legislation, as the ENR committee yesterday had the triennial review of water quality and river classifications in Maine, which is done through the Board of Environmental Protection. And the BEP has recommended that the Androscoggin River be reclassified, starting in the dam that's in Lisbon Falls down to Mary Meeting Bay. So the BEP's recommendations is about 20 miles shorter than Senator Claxton's bill. And that'll be coming forward in legislation in the ENR committee. We're still in the process of, analyzing and, trying to understand what the impacts may have on the businesses upstream as well as the dam owners. But, the fate of Senator Claxton's LD 676 is no longer necessary, and the committee will be moving forward with the BEP's recommendations, which will be printed and referred to the ENR committee shortly. Another one that I wanted to highlight is LD 1532. This is an act to protect Maine's air quality standards by strengthening requirements for air emissions licensing. This bill would have changed the law around air emissions licensing, making it go from every 10 years as it is in current law to every 2 years. And every 2 years when you renew your license, you would need to have a public forum notifying every resident within 5 miles of the emission site. Good news on this bill, when the ENR committee met a couple weeks ago, they decided to kill this bill. They voted unanimously ought not to pass on it, with the sponsor citing that she needs to take more time to collect data around the bill, and it didn't fit the timing to make a change right now. So that's a positive development in the ENR committee. That's not a bill that we'll have to deal with this legislative session. 2 other ones that I wanted to highlight: LD 1639, which is an act to protect the health and welfare of Maine communities and reduce harmful solid waste. This bill amends the definition of waste generated within the state, and this bill would also increase a disposal fee on a disposal fee cost that'll drive up the cost of doing business. We haven't heard much about this bill yet. The committee has not discussed it. And the last one is LD 1429, which is an act to achieve carbon neutrality in Maine by 2045. 1429 last session was a bill that would implement the time-sensitive recommendations of the work of the Maine Climate Council. They have essentially, this amendment has completely replaced that whole bill, replaced the title. As I just mentioned, this was not a recommendation of the Climate Council. This is only something that has been done by executive order. And, procedurally, our Chamber's Energy and Environmental Committee determined that, making a drastic change like this, completely replacing the whole bill and not having a public hearing on it and just trying to move forward is of concern. And DEP also recently changed the rules about how they measure annual greenhouse gas emissions. And we're still trying to navigate, how that happens. So there's some concerns around that change. Switching gears to the Energy Utilities Technologies Committee. First thing is, they're in the EUT committee, there's a lot of draft concepts that were carried over that we really have no idea about the bill. Act regarding energy utilities technology, and act to update the regulation of public utility monopolies. So some grave concern there, but the big carryover is LD 1634, which is an act to create the Maine Generation Authority. This would create an authority that would be structured very similar to the Turnpike Authority, and the Generation Authority would be charged with issuing ratepayer-backed bonds for renewable energy generation within Maine, which would essentially rival what the PUC does with their procurement process. And there's no issue that the sponsor's hope is that this would in turn result in cheaper renewable energy projects being generated in Maine, and that there's no issue with that right now. So that's a carryover of concern. And then the last one I'll touch on for right now is it had a public hearing yesterday. It's LD 383, which is an act concerning small wireless facilities in Maine. Essentially what this bill would do is, in 2019, a bill passed the 129th Legislature unanimously. The Chamber was involved, the Governor's Office was involved, the Department of Economic Community Development, some of the telecom companies, to create a streamlined permitting process for small cell wireless facilities. And this amendment that came forward yesterday would try and pretty much repeal some of those laws that were put in place in 2019. And the Chamber's opposed to that because it's bad public policy to repeal laws that were put in place, supported unanimously across the board. And this would also hurt wireless and 5G expansion in Maine, which presents an enormous economic opportunity, as well as helping Maine residents get more reliable connectivity and expansion of connectivity throughout Maine. So those are kind of some of the big EUT, ENR carryovers that I'm hitting on. I'll turn it back to Dana to discuss the upcoming session.
Yeah, Ben, also, you had a lot there to cover, but perhaps in the next session or the section of our program, we talk about the new bills. You could also comment on some educational workforce related issues that either are brought forward or are new. But with that, everybody take a deep breath and we will circle back and take a look at the new bills that have been allowed, the roughly 100 bills allowed into this session, and the impact it has and what we're concerned with. Peter, you want to kick it off again?
Thanks, Dana. Can everybody hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Sorry. It's important to point out a couple of things process-wise. As Dana indicated, this is the short session, and leadership has set deadlines on the various committees to have their work done, or certain percentages of their work done, starting in March, which means February is going to be a very busy time. But at the same time, the legislature has chosen to meet virtually. So they're conducting their business in the different various committees via Zoom. And they are planning to meet, at least in this month, they only are meeting twice. As Dana indicated, they're meeting next week. What they will do in February and March is unclear. It makes impacting legislation challenging, and it makes and losing those critical 5 or 10 minute conversations that you can have with a legislator on the third floor or outside of a committee room is, we've come to realize just how important those conversations are. And I just wanted to, as we start to talk about new bills and juxtaposed to the carryovers, just make sure people understand that that's sort of the parameters under which we're operating this session. I've got a couple of bills to talk about, and part of the issue is the legislature is printing new bills, but it is slower. We're up to about 1,930 pieces of legislation and about 150 since the end of the last session. So they are slogging their way through their new printed bills. But I'm going to also touch on a commission report that I've been following regarding paid family medical leave. So 1804 is a bill that the Judiciary Committee heard on Friday. It's a bill to adopt a common definition of domestic partner across all the different aspects of the Maine revised statute in which that term appears. In some cases, the current definition is different in different portions of the statute, but in many cases, it is very specific and with various points and requirements two individuals would need to meet in order to qualify as domestic partners. The proposed definition in 1804 is a very broad definition, and it would have significant impacts on employers because it's difficult to understand, and thus different employers will apply it differently and the same in different circumstances. And we expressed those concerns to the Judiciary Committee, and between our speaking, I'm following them because it's supposed to come up as a work session today, but it also has implications for FMLA in Maine because it's so broad. Almost anybody would qualify for FMLA leave as domestic partners. I'll circle back to that when I talk about the commission report. The second bill is 1881. It's Representative Dillingham's bill, and it deals with medical marijuana, workers' compensations, and workers' compensation settlements. As many of you are aware, there was a law court decision handed down a year or two ago, which basically says workers' compensation insurance carriers do not have to pay for medical marijuana. As a matter of fact, because it's not because there's a state law that prohibits it, but because the federal government still recognizes it as a Schedule I drug. We are not honestly clear what Representative Dillingham, who's the bill sponsor, is trying to accomplish with the bill. In some cases, when it comes to a settlement, what the injured worker does with their settlement is really up to them. And if they want to use it in part to treat their pain or their ongoing medical issues with medical marijuana, as opposed to, say, opiates, they can certainly do that, and it does not endanger their settlement. At the same time, many workers' comp carriers would rather pay or assist an injured worker in obtaining or using medical marijuana than opiates because there's less risk of addiction. It seems to be every bit as successful in many cases, and patients would prefer it. So I'm not really sure where this bill is headed. It is scheduled for a public hearing next Monday. We will be monitoring this bill carefully. We have met with the sponsor, and we're still not clear what it is she's trying to accomplish. With respect to the Commission on Paid Family Medical Leave, I know there are folks on this call who have been following this, as have I, on behalf of the Chamber. They have met 4 or 5 times since this fall in an attempt to hear from various stakeholders, including the State Chamber, and we were joined by the U.S. Chamber, and advocates for paid family medical leave. They've gathered information, gathered input. They've heard from some other states that also have paid family medical leave. And they are at the point now where they are beginning to ask and put together what the request would be to an actuary to price out what paid family medical leave would look like and cost. And unfortunately, they've taken a sort of broad approach to their initial pricing. They've, for instance, and I'll look at my notes here, they've suggested they price out salary replacement at 80, 90, and 100% of the state's average weekly wage. They've suggested they price out 12, 20, and 26 weeks of leave rather than the current state statute of 12. No waiting period, and including self-employed individuals as well as employees in the workplace. They have not indicated whether they want to have employers look at employers paying for a portion of the leave or have it solely employee financed. And they are meeting with actuaries who have expressed an interest in providing them with some information. And those actuaries are both in-state and out-of-state actuaries. And the out-of-state actuaries have actually, in some cases, worked with some of the states that have put in place paid family medical leave. This is an ongoing issue, but the Senate chair did indicate that there would not be a bill this year on paid family medical leave. They don't have time to put it together, and they lack the information necessary to establish essentially a state-funded long-term disability plan. But they continue to go forward, and they will continue to gather information, and they will be hiring an actuary to come up with some numbers. So that's a quick report on that issue. Linda?
Yeah, and taxation, the Taxation Committee doesn't have a lot of new bills this year. We are monitoring some department bills, which Maine Revenue Services and DAFS puts in. You never know what they're going to put for amendments on these bills, so we're going to be monitoring those closely, but there's just a few of those. So we haven't seen a lot as of yet. What we are going to be doing is we are going to be monitoring OPEGA's reports to the Taxation Committee. The Taxation Committee met on Tuesday of this week and really reviewed OPEGA's reports on the Better and Betty program and the Maine Capital Investment Credit. We opposed these reports a couple years ago because what OPEGA concluded was that these programs and this credit does not result or influence and stimulate the Maine economy and stimulate capital investment. That's completely not true. The design of these programs are very simple and the goals have been met. If you invest, you get the credit or you get the program. So it's not, the design was absolutely on target and the goals. And basically what they concluded also was these programs and the credit isn't achieving results. Well, that's again not true. They didn't interview one company in all of these reports to find out how these companies invest and why they invest. And when they invest, they look for the rate of return on their investment. They did not interview any companies, not one. So we find that very surprising, but we did oppose these a couple of years ago. The Taxation Committee was supposed to review them last session. They didn't have time. So they are reviewing them this week. I expect at some point the Pine Tree Zone report will be in there as well, but that is not this week. It's just the Better and Betty and the Maine Capital Investment Credit. I have talked to some of the Taxation Committee members and shared our concerns. I'm not sure if they're going to allow public comment on these reports, but if they do, we will be prepared to deliver the same testimony we did before the GOC, the Government Oversight Committee, a couple years ago. So that's kind of the reports that we're watching. The other thing today is the Taxation Committee is meeting today at 10, and they're going to hear a report on the tax expenditure working group. Basically, this is OPEGA's report. It was actually a subcommittee of the Taxation Committee made up of 4 members of tax and 4 members of the Government Oversight Committee. And really the purpose of this working group was they met a few times over the summer, and the purpose was to really look at how OPEGA is doing these tax expenditure reviews. And are they really, should they be changed? Should the process be changed? And really what needs to be done here? Couple recommendations that came out of that report that we oppose. One is they want to focus on business tax expenditures. The realm of tax expenditures includes nonprofit, quality of life. It's not just business. It should be including of all tax expenditures. So they want to focus on business tax expenditures, which is kind of interesting. And the other recommendation kind of goes along with this one. Basically, they want Maine Revenue Services to amend their reporting requirements with respect to the same tax expenditures. They want to show 6 years of foregone tax revenue. So basically they're saying, okay, what's going to happen if this report is accepted is you have all these business tax expenditures and here's how much they're costing the state of Maine. What they're not looking at, and what the state does not do, is dynamic fiscal modeling, which is basically looks at both sides of the equation. Yes, these expenditures cost the state, but here's what they're bringing in terms of creation of jobs and retention of jobs, increased investment, indirect benefits relating to vendors and suppliers related to those investments. So they're not looking at both sides of the equation, they're only looking at one side. So we are going to be opposing, if we have an opportunity to, we will be opposing this report as well. Because it's just setting the argument up for the left as, you know, we have all these business tax expenditures and here's how much they're costing, but what they're not looking at is what they're getting in return. And that's huge. So we're going to be monitoring these reports very closely over the next few weeks. And if there's an opportunity again to speak, we will. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And I'll start off with a few education, workforce development related things going on in the legislature. The first thing I'll touch on is the Affordable Housing Study Commission. So as some of us are aware, following a resolve that was passed in the first session of the 130th, it was a bill by Speaker Fecto. It created a commission to study affordable housing in Maine and come back with recommendations to the legislature. It's my understanding that, well, the report was released with 8 or 9 recommendations in mid-December, I want to say. And it's my understanding that the report is still in the drafting process with OPLA and the revisor's office. In a couple weeks, they'll be coming out with the legislation that's, you know, implementing the recommendations that came from the Affordable Housing Study Commission. So that's one thing I wanted to hit on. The other one is LD 1652, which is Speaker Fecto's bill around child care workforce development. This bill would require the Commissioner of Health and Human Services, Commissioner of Education, and the Commissioner of Labor to jointly develop and implement an early childhood educators workforce support program to recruit and retain early childhood educators working with children up to the age of 5. This is a bill that is going to have an amendment coming at some point. It was scheduled to be in the IDEA committee on the 27th, but they just postponed it yesterday. You know, so those are obviously two big initiatives that would help with workforce development. And then in education, the big thing that I'm waiting for is last session there was another study that was passed, LD 313, which required the Department of Education to convene a work group to explore innovative approaches to advancing career and technical education opportunities for middle and high school age students in Maine. That work group has been meeting and they're due back to report to the Education Committee no later than March 15th of 2022. And with all these study reports, you know, there's the possibility for legislation to come forward. So those are the 3 big things that I'm watching this upcoming session in the education workforce development world. Shifting gears back to energy utilities for this upcoming session, there's 3 bills right now that I'm following closely. First one is LD 1894, which is an act to support municipal broadband infrastructure through incentives and competition. This bill would create the Internet Access Expansion Fund, which would be administered by the Connect Maine Authority to issue grants for broadband expansion. The problem with this bill is there's a 50% requirement for some of those grants to go towards municipal and locally owned broadband infrastructure networks, which is, you know, obviously very problematic to mandate 50% of them. There are certainly certain circumstances in some municipalities where having municipal owned networks is a benefit and it works well, but mandating 50% of them is a huge concern. So that bill is scheduled for a public hearing next Thursday, I believe, or 2 Thursdays from now. So, you know, that's one that we're keeping an eye on and we'll be weighing in on. The other one is LD 1913, which is an act to review strategies for improving utility rate affordability to provide utility relief. This bill would create a study group to convene and discuss how we can improve utility rate affordability in Maine. We have no opposition to that. Our concern is that in the study group that would be convened, it's focused on residential and homeowners. And in the study group, there's representation in the bill language right now for renewable energy associations, environmental groups, a couple other entities, but there's no representation for having the business community be involved in this study group. And we feel as business owners and a business association, we obviously have large electric utility bills that we're dealing with as well. So we don't oppose the bill. We're just going to weigh in with comments that there should be business representation on this study group that will be formed. And then the last one is a bill that has not been printed yet, which is it made it through Legislative Council. It's a bill from Representative Scott Cuddy, which would attach public project labor agreements onto renewable energy projects that are more than 2 megawatts. This is pretty much a repeat of a bill from the first session, which was LD 1231, which the chamber opposed then, as well as several other entities, and will be a big fight this legislative session. Again, the language of that bill has not been printed yet, so I'm monitoring that closely for when that language will be printed and in which committee it will be referred to, if it will be referred to the EUT committee or the labor committee. We're still trying to figure that out. Dana?
Thanks, Ben, Linda, and Peter. And I know, Linda, that you have time constraint because you got a committee at 10, and I think Peter's probably trying to monitor and follow a bill that he's working on as well. So I'm going to open it up for questions, and if there's any at the moment for Peter or Linda, it would be great to go to those first before we may lose them around 10. Anybody have any questions? Angie said you can either put it in the chat room or she can see you as well. Representative?
Yep, let me ask him to unmute. There you go, Representative Underwood.
There you go.
Yes, this question is for Mr. Lucas. What was the bill number again, that had the project labor agreement that you referenced?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. So that bill has not been printed yet, so it hasn't been assigned an LD number. But the LD number I referred from the first session was LD 1231.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions? Let me say this, either to give you more time perhaps to come up with a question or not, but certainly by the presentation you've heard here today and the number of bills, there are a lot to be concerned about and the impact that each of them carry at any time, particularly during the pandemic that we're all struggling with. I'm very, very proud, and I know the board is, of our advocacy team and their work. I'll also say their efforts are to work closely with our local and regional chamber family. We do that every week on Monday to update them on issues that are in play. I would also take the occasion to reinforce what Peter said. He said it very well. I only add words to reinforce it, which is that a lot is going to take place in the month of February. We're not sure what our available access will be in terms of their return to the Capitol. That is a challenge when they're not in the Capitol deciding the fate of bills. So I would ask or plead with all of you or any of you that if you need additional information about any of these bills that concern you, if you want to chat with any that you've heard about bills that they've shared with you about, please feel free to call them because they're very accessible, or call me and I'll be sure that we can get the answer to you. Most of all, if you know your legislator or introduce yourself to your local legislator, I suspect you know them probably pretty well. Your access to them is fundamental to the success, particularly in times like this. So I guess I would say that we're all in this together. And if you can help, please do so. But we'll do everything within our power to address the issues we've shared with you. And again, I repeat, if you have any question, please reach out. If anything that we have said you need further clarification on, please reach out. I saw a question come in from Judith Burley. Angie, do you?
Yep, I think Ben answered that, unless you want to expand on it, Ben. Then we have a question from Dave Dunning. In light of the move to virtual, can you suggest some other ways business owners and local chambers can effectively have an impact on legislation throughout this session?
Well, again, that might have come in while I was speaking, but I would say, and I'm sure Representative Underwood would agree with this, is that the influence that you have, the acquaintances that you have with your local legislators mean a lot to legislators. They really do. If you have an issue, please reach out to them. I repeat, if you have a question that we can help you with, please reach out to us. But the access you have, either by way of our broad statewide presence or your local regional chambers, I know that a number of them hold meetings in which, with their local legislators, that they discuss relevant issues being taken up in the legislature and various committees. But the access that you have to your local legislator via a telephone call, Zoom, or whatever really works well, and don't underestimate its value.
Hey, Dana, can I just add to that?
Please do.
I think it's important. Obviously, part of what we do is provide communications and information to our members about issues that are of high importance. For instance, I can assure you, you're going to be hearing from us around LD 607, the overtime standard bill, as you did last year with 553, the bill to end employment at will. So there will be grassroots opportunities for you folks to participate. And by that, we mean you reach out and contact your locally elected official, whether you think they're on the same side of the bill as you or not. Because a lot of people think, well, we only want to contact people who we think might support a bill that we oppose. That's not true. We want you to contact everybody, so everybody has the same information and they can know just how important this bill is to all of the business community in this organization. So grassroots participation, sending an email, making a phone call, even doing it the old-fashioned way and writing a letter, is really critical, and it will be critical, particularly in this virtual world in which we're operating and conducting public policy. It's really the only outreach method that we have, and the more that folks like you who are on this call are involved with those discussions and communicating, your concerns or your support for a particular piece of legislation, I think, and the representative may be able to attest to that, the better it is, because you folks are real folks. You employ people, you are employees yourselves, and you know the impact of some of these proposals on your own places of business. So I would urge the strongest possible way, when you hear from us from a grassroots perspective on any piece of public policy, please do participate, pick up that phone, send that email. It's critically important.
Yeah, in that regard, also, I failed to mention that Peter referenced it, but Linda is kind of our grassroots czar. And so when there are issues that are coming up that are vital, that we really want you to reach out to, we'll submit to you that piece of legislation, what it means, and ask you to do exactly what Peter has indicated that I reinforce. And so if you want to be added to that grassroots, just let Linda or myself know, and we'll be sure, because it is an important part of gaining success, whether it's in favor of something or opposed. As Peter said, your role is vital. We also have, from Donna Casassi, more PFAS bills have been submitted. Ben, can you give us a sense of where these are going?
Yeah, thanks, Dana, and thanks, Donna. You are right, LD 1875 and LD 1911 have both been printed and referred to the ENR committee. They are scheduled for a public hearing next week. So, we'll see how the public hearing goes. But, certainly if you guys have any concerns about what the aim of these bills will do, I'm certainly happy to have a conversation offline. We discussed them as the Energy and Environmental Policy Committee for the Chamber a couple weeks ago, and we have another policy committee meeting tomorrow morning, which I plan to bring back up and hear from the folks if they have any concerns. So certainly happy to have an open conversation with you, Donna.
Yeah, that's a real value to what we hope this on the horizon type program provides, and that's a chance for you to do exactly what Donna and Dave and others have done, is to ask questions to get the information. And I repeat, you're not restricted to only on the horizon program. You can do that any day at any time, and either by email, by phone, whatever the case may be. Please reach out if you have any questions or any concerns. The sounds of silence are deafening, as they say, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to be able to share by way of our advocacy team those issues that impact you, those issues that I'm sure are important to you and to our economy and to the people that work with you in your everyday business. So again, I'll circle back to the beginning and say thank you for being a part of On the Horizon. We look forward to continuing to work with you. And we also thank all of our sponsors that you can see on the screen here. And again, we look forward to working with you. And if you have any questions at any time or want to get involved, you know where we are. Please just ask. Thank you and take care.